They felt that Christian unity depended on everyone else who came to Christ adopting their treasured distinctives. Anyone's welcome, they would say, but they have to become like us. And these distinctives became a condition of fellowship.
Welcome to Open the Bible with Pastor Colin Smith. I'm David Pick. Glad you could be with us today. And Colin, what is the they that we're talking about here?
Okay, we're in the book of Galatians, and Paul is speaking to a group of Christian believers who felt that all other Christians should have to adopt what had made them distinctively Jewish Christians, and therefore that element became essential to the gospel. And Paul's answer to that, and there was actually a disagreement between Peter and Paul over this that was very, very wonderfully resolved. Paul's answer is that the gospel is the gospel of God's grace. It is what Jesus Christ does for us. And if we try and add in anything that we do in response and make that part of the gospel, we actually lose the ground of grace that is essential to the message that is trusted to us in the New Testament.
So important for us to understand what the gospel of grace really is, and that's what this series and message is all about. So join us if you can in Galatians chapter 2 as we begin the message, The Gospel is Worth Defending. Here's Colin.
This morning in Galatians, we come to a critical moment in the life of the early church where this gospel had to be defended. And Galatians 2 tells us the story of a clash between two giants of the early church, Peter and Paul. If you look at verse 11, when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he was clearly in the wrong. Now, this clash between Paul and Peter has been taken by some modern commentators to suggest that Paul and Peter somehow preached a different message, that Peter was more about works and that Paul was more about grace, that these two versions of the gospel, it is said, go back to the beginning with these two apostles, and that both have their separate lines of dissent within the church even to this day, and that if we are evangelicals, it just happens to be that we prefer Paul over Peter. Now, that is what is being said in a large part of academia in these days, and I hope that you will be able to see, simply from what we learned last week, that this cannot possibly be the case. Remember, we learned last week that the gospel does not come by human invention, nor does it come by the development of tradition, but rather, Paul says, it comes by revelation from Jesus Christ, and that is why there can only be one gospel. You see, you can have many inventions, you can have many traditions, but you can only have one gospel that comes by revelation from Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ is not in confusion. He does not contradict himself. And that is why the central emphasis on there being one gospel is so important throughout the letter. If you have it open in front of you, as I hope you do, will you see there in verse 6 of chapter 1, just looking back over last week, I'm astonished, Paul says, that you're so quickly deserting the one who called you by the grace of Christ, and you're turning to a different gospel, which is no gospel at all. You see, if you turn away from this gospel, Paul says, you don't have any good news because there isn't any other good news. Or verse 8 of chapter 1, even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let him be eternally condemned. Or chapter 1, verses 11 and 12, the gospel I preached is not something that man made up. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. So there is one gospel, and it comes from Jesus Christ. Now, in Galatians in chapter 2, as we move on to this new chapter, Paul makes it very, very clear that he preached the same message as Peter. Indeed, he has a number of things to say about his relationship with Peter, beginning in chapter 1 and verse 18. He tells us there that the first time that he met with Peter was 3 years after his conversion. Chapter 1, verse 18, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Peter, and I stayed with him for 15 days. Then we're told in chapter 2 and verse 1 that 14 years later, Paul went up to Jerusalem a second time, and this time he did it with Barnabas and Titus, traveled with them. Verse 2 of chapter 2, I set before them, that is the Jerusalem apostles and others who had come into leadership in this Jerusalem church, I set before them the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles. Now, the result of this presentation of the gospel, Paul's explaining what he teaches to the Gentiles. In verse 7, we're told that these men added nothing to my message. On the contrary, they saw that I had been entrusted with the task of preaching the gospel to the Gentiles, just as Peter had been to the Jews. In verse 9, James, Peter, and John, those reputed to be pillars, gave me the right hand of fellowship when they recognized the grace given to me. So in summary, what happens here is that Paul goes to Jerusalem. He lays out before the Jerusalem apostles and the other church leaders in that great city the message that he preaches. This is what I teach. Peter, James, and John recognize that what Paul teaches is precisely the same message as they are preaching, and so they give to Paul the right hand of fellowship. It is clear that they preached the same gospel. Now, Galatians in chapter 2 tells us now then about a time when this gospel, proclaimed by all of the apostles, had to be defended. And the reason it had to be defended in this clash between Paul and Peter was not that Peter didn't believe it, but rather that Peter acted inconsistently with it. He was not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, is what Paul says. And the story that we're going to look at today reminds us that the gospel needs to be defended not only in the world, where it's obviously under attack, but also in the church, where it is constantly under pressure to be reshaped.
You're listening to Open the Bible with Pastor Colin Smith and a message called The Gospel is Worth Defending. If you tuned in late, or if you want to go back and listen again, you can do that by coming online to our website, openthebible.org.uk. There you'll find all the broadcasts that have already gone out. Open the Bible is supported financially by our listeners. We do depend on people like you to keep Pastor Colin Smith's messages on the radio and online. So if you already support us in that way, thank you so much. If that's something you're considering beginning to do this month, if you're able to set up a new direct debit of £5 per month or more, or a one-off gift of £50, we'd love to say thank you by sending you a copy of Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan's classic allegory of the Christian life, which so many have enjoyed and benefited by reading, along with a specially printed Open the Bible bookmark and an Open the Bible pen. Colin, many people may have heard of this book, but not really know what it's all about.
Oh, well, Pilgrim's Progress is a classic of Christian literature that was written by John Bunyan in the 17th century. Bunyan's one of my heroes of the faith. He was a preacher of the gospel, and he was arrested for preaching the gospel during a time when there were real restrictions on believers in England. And during his time in prison, he wrote this Christian classic that is a story about a man who takes a journey from a city called Destruction to the celestial city, which is his way of speaking about heaven. And it is full of profound insight into the Christian life. It's so easy to read, and it is so rich in what we can learn from it.
Well, we'd love to send you a copy of Pilgrim's Progress as our way of saying thank you for supporting Open the Bible financially. Full terms and conditions on our website at openthebible.org.uk. Back to the message now. We're in Galatians and chapter 2. Here's Colin.
Now, our outline today, and we'll actually continue it into next week, also God willing, is really very simple, and I hope that it might be useful to help us all grasp the gospel, which is what this whole series is all about. What's the gospel? Let me give you it in 3 headings. It's grace, it's life, and it's for the world. It's grace, it's life, and it's for the world. And if we can get hold of these three things and hold them in our minds and in our hearts and understand them well, we will have a good grasp of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let's say them together. It's grace, it's life, and it's for the world. Okay, one more time. It's grace, it's life, and it's for the world. Now, we'll take these in the order that they come in this passage, and we're going to begin with it's for the world, which is really the theme of verses 1 to 14. Let's look at chapter 2 and verse 7. I had been entrusted with the task of preaching the gospel to the Gentiles, just as Peter had been to the Jews. Now, if you read the New Testament carefully, you'll discover that there was a real struggle going on throughout the early New Testament period about the mission of the church. The apostles in Jerusalem maintained a narrow focus on evangelism among the Jewish people. And Paul had been commissioned by the risen Lord Jesus Christ to go to the Gentiles. Now, this word Gentile, as you know, simply means anyone who is not a Jew. That's a whole lot of people in the world, right? Evangelizing the Jews was hard enough. Evangelizing everyone else in the whole world must have seemed completely overwhelming and daunting indeed. Now, I've found when I come to the word Gentile in the Bible that I find it helpful to read it with this phrase, the whole world, because that's really what it means, the nations. Gentile means everybody who is not a Jew, so it's really the whole world. It is all of the cultures of the world outside of the Jewish nation. So if you'll follow, let me read verses 7 to 9 in this way so that we get the emphasis. Chapter 2, verse 7. These men added nothing to my message. On the contrary, they saw that I had been entrusted with the task of preaching the gospel to the whole world, just as Peter had been to the Jews. For God, who was at work in the ministry of Peter to the Jews, was also at work in my ministry as an apostle to the whole world. James, Peter, and John, those reputed to be pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship. When they recognized the grace given to me, they agreed that we should go to the whole world and that they should go to the Jews. Now, this is a strange division of labor, don't you think? 12 apostles in Jerusalem and all of the resources of the Jerusalem church, though interestingly enough, that inward-looking church quickly became poor. 12 apostles in Jerusalem, and all of their focus is on mission to the Jews, a hugely significant but proportionally tiny sliver of the world population. And this one man, Paul, is responsible for evangelism to everyone else. That is a strange division of labor. The vast majority of the resources of the Church of Jesus Christ focused overwhelmingly on a tiny segment of the world's population. And there isn't a missionary in the world today who does not feel that pain and that tension right now. Well, that was their agreement. They shook hands on it, and off they went to pursue their different ministries. Peter and the apostles based in Jerusalem to the Jews, and Paul with the overwhelming challenge of the rest of the world. And that was fine, we're told, until verse 11, when Peter came to Antioch. And then something went terribly wrong. Verse 12, before certain men came from James, Peter used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back. He'd no longer eat with them. Now, this business of eating, of course, eating with the Gentiles, that really meant recognizing them as authentic believers. And Peter had done this. He shared fellowship with them, recognized them as authentic believers. But when certain men from James came, he drew back. Now, why did he draw back from recognizing these foreign believers, Gentile believers, as authentic Christians? Well, he began to draw back, verse 12, and separate himself from these Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. Here's trouble. The circumcision group. So we're being told quite clearly that Peter pulled back from fellowship, from recognizing the Gentiles as authentic believers, because he was taking the heat from a powerful group of people who wanted to impose the distinctives of their Jewish heritage on other believers. This was what they were doing in Jerusalem, but now they come onto Paul's territory in Antioch, and when Gentiles are coming to faith in Jesus Christ, these folks who've come down from James, the circumcision group, they go round the churches and they say, now look, it's great to have you coming to faith in Jesus Christ, but now you need to adopt the distinctives that he has given to us, the Jewish people. And these, of course, included circumcision, dietary laws, and Old Testament festivals, and so forth and so on. Now, it is very interesting that this powerful group in the early church, the circumcision group, they put the heat on Paul and they put the heat on Peter, but with completely opposite results. Look at what happened when they tried to recruit Paul to advance their cause. Verse 4. Some false brothers had infiltrated our ranks to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus and to make us slaves. And they're trying to recruit Paul, you see. We did not give in to them for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might remain in you. And they turned the heat up on us, Paul says. They tried to recruit us and to pressurize us into advancing the imposition of these Jewish distinctives on everyone else, and we didn't give in to them for a moment. Why? Because we stood up to protect the freedom of the gospel for you. Then notice what happened when they turned up the heat on Peter, verse 12. When they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. So the same pressure on the two leading apostles from this powerful group of people out of Jerusalem, and completely opposite results. Paul stands firm for the freedom of the gospel in Jesus Christ and for the authenticity of these new Gentile believers. And Peter, under pressure, caves in. And when Peter caves in, Barnabas soon follows. And soon there was a great division. So we find that Paul, therefore, had to stand up to Peter. Verse 14, when I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter in front of them all, you are a Jew, and you're living like a Gentile and not a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? You see, he'd capitulated. Now, I know by 15 minutes in, folks are going to be saying, this is all very interesting stuff from the Bible. What in all the world does it have to do with us? Is that your question? Far more to do with us than might first meet the eye. The circumcision group believed in Jesus, but they had a narrow ministry to people who shared their heritage. They felt that Christian unity depended on everyone else who came to Christ adopting their treasured distinctives. Anyone's welcome, they would say, but they have to become like us. And these distinctives became a condition of fellowship. And I hope that you can see that if they had prevailed in the early church, the gospel would have stayed within the narrow bounds of Jewish culture, and it would never have reached the world. It would never have come to us today, right? It would have remained in a backwater, limited to one cultural expression. Folks like us and folks who are ready to become like us, and you cannot reach the world on that basis. That's what this debate was all about. So I thank God from the bottom of my heart that Paul stood up to Peter when he was wrong. Don't you thank God for that? Don't you see that otherwise the gospel would never have come to us and we wouldn't be here today? If Paul had not stood up to Peter, the gospel would never have reached the world. And if we do not stand up for the gospel today, it will not reach others, but will remain here within a narrow band of people. The gospel is worth defending because it's what? It's grace, it's life, and it's for the world. Let's catch that again, shall we? It's grace, it's life, it's for the world.
You've been listening to Open the Bible with Pastor Colin Smith and a message called The Gospel is Worth Defending. It's part of our series, Grasping the Gospel, and if you've missed any of the series or if you want to go back and listen again, you can do that by coming online to our website, openthebible.org.uk. Or find us as a podcast, and those are on all the main podcast sites. Search for Open the Bible UK and subscribe if you want to be reminded regularly to receive that podcast. Also on our website and available as a podcast, you can find Open the Bible Daily. It's a series of short 2 to 3 minute daily reflections based on Pastor Colin's teaching and read in the UK by Sue McLeish. There's a new one every day, and many people find it's a great way to start the day. Also on our website, you'll find our Bible study course, Fly Through the Bible. This short, simple journey through the Bible story can be enjoyed on your own, with a friend, or as a group. For each of the 15 sessions, you can watch a short video, then work through the questions. If you want to do a more detailed Bible study, a guide is available for you to use in small groups or one-to-one. To make the most of Fly Through the Bible, we recommend buying the book. There is also a free app that can be used alongside all the materials. To find Fly Through the Bible, go to our website, openthebible.org.uk, and click on Courses. At Open the Bible, we welcome contact with our listeners. If you've been blessed by Pastor Colin Smith's teaching and you'd like to reach out to us, there are several ways you can do that. You can write to us at Open the Bible, P.O. Box 1420, Cheltenham, GL50 9PG. Or you can phone us on 0330 335 8089. If we're not available when you call, leave a message for us and we'll return your call. And you can find all those contact details on our website, openthebible.org.uk. Open the Bible is supported by our listeners financially. We do depend on people like you to keep Pastor Colin Smith's messages on the radio and online. So if you already support us in that way, thank you very much. If that's something you're considering starting to do this month, if you're able to set up a new direct debit of £5 per month or more, or a one-off gift of £50 or more, we'd love to say thank you by sending you Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan's classic allegory about the Christian life, which so many have enjoyed and benefited greatly from reading. Along with the book, we'll send you a specially printed Open the Bible bookmark and an Open the Bible pen. Colin, I've heard that this is one of your favourite books.
It absolutely is. In fact, if I was stranded on a desert island and I was only allowed to take one book apart from the Bible, of course, then my choice would definitely be John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. Here's why. If you've got one book besides the Bible, you would want to have something that was enjoyable, compelling. You'd want to have something that you would keep coming back to, and you'd want to have something that did you lasting good. And John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress has fulfilled all of these things in my life. It really is a treasured book, and I'm absolutely delighted that we are able to offer this month John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. It is a book that you will treasure, and every Christian home ought to have a copy.
So we'd love to send you a copy of Pilgrim's Progress to say thank you for setting up a new direct debit in the amount of £5 per month or more, or a one-off gift of £50 or more this month in support of Open the Bible. Full terms and conditions are on our website. That's at openthebible.org.uk. For Open the Bible and for Pastor Colin Smith, I'm David Pick, and I hope you'll be able to join us again very soon. Grace sounds wonderful, but in reality there's something in all of us that we find it easier to earn than to receive. Discover why this always fails with God next time on Open the Bible.